Number the storage unit inheritance. They laughed when the lawyer said my inheritance was in a storage unit. 6 months later, I owned everything they loved. I sat in that mahogany-paneled office while my father Frank adjusted his Rolex, and my sister Ashley examined her manicured nails. The air smelled of leather-bound books and expensive wood polish. This wasn't a normal will reading, this was an execution, and I was tied to the chair. My mother Eleanor had died 3 weeks earlier. The funeral was a spectacle she would have hated. Ashley wore designer black and took grief selfies for Instagram. Frank played the devastated widower while calculating his inheritance. I stood in the back, dry-eyed because I'd already cried myself empty alone in my tiny apartment above the mechanic shop. Attorney Marcus Sterling cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable as he opened the portfolio containing my mother's will. I watched his eyes scan the document and saw him wince when he reached my section. Frank received Mother's entire investment portfolio: stocks, bonds, savings accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. He smirked and leaned back, satisfied. This was his validation. Ashley inherited the family home in Maple Creek, a sprawling colonial mansion worth over $2 million, complete with furniture, antiques, and Mother's jewelry collection. She squealed like a teenager getting a car. Mr. Sterling handed her an ornate key, which she immediately photographed. Within seconds, she'd posted it. Number blessed, number family legacy, number queen. Then Mr. Sterling turned to me. My heart raced. Maybe she'd left me something meaningful. He read in a flat voice, and to my daughter Evelyn I leave the entirety of the possessions stored in Unit 237 at the U Stowett storage facility on Route 9. The room exploded. Frank's laughter rattled the crystal paperweight. Ashley doubled over, makeup running as tears of mirth streamed down her face. I sat frozen, face burning. A storage unit. Not even the unit itself, just the contents, just junk in some metal box. Frank recovered first, slamming his palm on the desk. Trash belongs in the trash, Evelyn. Your mother finally figured out what you really are. 28 years old, and what do you have? You work in a garage. You smell like motor oil and failure. I couldn't respond. My throat had closed. Defending myself only made things worse with Frank. Ashley pulled out her phone, recording me. Hey everyone, you're not going to believe this. My sister just inherited a storage unit full of trash. Should I start a GoFundMe? Does she need a sleeping bag for her new 10x10 mansion? Comments flooded in. Laughing emojis. People I'd never met joining the mockery. I stood up shakily and headed for the door. Frank stuck out his leg. I stumbled, catching myself on a chair. When I straightened, he pressed his finger into my chest hard enough to hurt. Get out of my sight, he hissed. You're an embarrassment to this family. That storage unit is exactly where you belong, with all the other things people throw away. I left without a word. Past the assistant who couldn't meet my eyes, down the marble stairs, out to the parking lot where my 15-year-old pickup sat between Frank's Mercedes and Ashley's BMW. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Ashley's post was going viral. The storage unit princess. Someone dubbed me. The comments kept coming. Each one a fresh needle of shame. I drove home in a daze to my studio apartment above Garcia's auto repair. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd paid for it with money I'd earned. Frank had never given me a dime after I turned 18. I sat on my second-hand couch and cried, not just for the inheritance, but for the relationship I'd never had with my mother. For every time Frank called me worthless and Ashley treated me like a stranger, for being officially, legally, permanently rejected. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a headache. I needed to see what was in that storage unit. Maybe it was just junk, my mother's final cruel joke. But I had to know if there was any evidence she'd loved me even a little. The U Stowett facility was depressing. It sat at the end of Route 9 between an abandoned tire factory and unused railroad tracks. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire surrounded rows of orange metal units. Weeds pushed through concrete cracks. I had the key. Mr. Sterling had handed it to me on my way out. It was ordinary, attached to a tag with the unit number in my mother's handwriting, 237. Finding the unit took time. The numbers were faded and the layout confusing. Finally, I stood before Unit 237, my hand shaking as I unlocked it. The door rolled up. The smell hit first dust, mildew, stale air. The unit was dark, packed nearly to the ceiling. Boxes labeled winter clothes and old textbooks, broken furniture, garbage bags of fabric. It would take hours to sort through. And for what? To confirm I was equivalent to trash? I was about to leave when I noticed something in the back corner. A military-style footlocker, olive green with rust spots. It looked deliberate, hidden behind everything else. I moved boxes and a broken chair to reach it. The trunk was heavy, secured with a serious padlock. Someone wanted whatever was inside to stay secret. I didn't have a key for this lock. Frustration built. Of course there would be one more obstacle. I went to my truck and grabbed my toolbox, finding a crowbar. Breaking the lock took effort. It slipped twice, nearly taking my thumb. Finally, With a screech of metal, the lock gave way. I knelt and lifted the lid. It wasn't trash. Inside were folders and sealed plastic bags full of documentation. Financial records, transfer statements, bank accounts I'd never heard of. And on top, a letter in my mother's handwriting. "My dearest Evelyn," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I can only hope you've made it this far. I know what the will reading must have been like. I know what Frank and Ashley did, what they said. I know because I've lived with them for decades, and I know exactly who they are. This is not cruelty, my darling. This is justice." My hands shook as I continued reading. My mother explained everything. How Frank had controlled her financially from the moment they married. How he'd used money as a weapon. How Ashley had learned from him, becoming his protege in manipulation and abuse. How they'd both treated me as less than because I refused to play their games. But my mother hadn't been helpless. For years, decades even, she'd been moving money. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She'd been careful, patient. She'd opened accounts in her maiden name in other states. She'd bought property Frank never knew existed. She'd converted assets into bearer bonds, nearly untraceable instruments worth a fortune to whoever held them. And she'd documented everything Frank had done wrong. Every shady business deal, every instance of fraud, every lie. She'd recorded arguments, saved emails, kept copies of altered tax documents. She'd built a case that would destroy him utterly. All of it was now mine. I sat back and laughed. It started small but grew until tears ran down my face. Not trash, not worthless, not forgotten. My mother had given me a weapon, and she'd made sure they'd never see it coming. The letter continued with instructions, advice on how to proceed. She'd recommended a lawyer in Boston who specialized in asset recovery. She'd left me bearer bonds worth hundreds of thousands. She'd left me titles to properties generating rental income. She'd left me proof to destroy Frank's reputation. At the end, she wrote, "Frank and Ashley will drown in the ashes of their own making. Don't confront them directly. Take everything they love quietly, systematically. Let them strangle themselves with their own pride. This isn't revenge, Evelyn. This is justice. This is me finally protecting you the way I should have all along. I'm sorry I couldn't do it while I was alive. I was a coward. But I can do this for you now. Make them pay. Make them understand what it means to lose everything. And then, when they have nothing left, walk away. Live your life. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. I love you. I have always loved you. Mom." I sat in that storage unit for hours, examining everything. Bearer bonds in a fireproof case, each cataloged with its value. Property deeds in plastic sleeves with rental agreements showing consistent income. Evidence against Frank in 3 folders, organized chronologically with sticky notes. There was also a USB drive. I listened with amazement to recordings of Frank bragging about screwing over partners, falsifying tax returns, manipulating contracts, hours of him incriminating himself. This was nuclear. This could put him in prison, but I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. Not until I'd done exactly what my mother suggested. I was going to take everything from them quietly and let them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. The first thing I did was nothing. I went back to my apartment, back to my job at the garage, back to my simple life. I let Frank and Ashley think they'd won. Meanwhile, I contacted the lawyer my mother recommended. David Chen operated from a small prestigious firm in Boston. I drove up on a Saturday and met him in his office overlooking the harbor. He was maybe 40, with kind eyes and calm demeanor. He read my mother's letter, examined the documents, and sat back in shock. "Your mother was remarkable. This is one of the most thorough cases of asset protection I've ever seen. She built you an empire with careful legal protection, and she did it while appearing to be a traditional housewife under her husband's control. That takes serious skill." Over the next months, David and I consolidated my mother's hidden assets. We sold the bearer bonds gradually. We established an LLC that couldn't be traced back to me. We started acquiring things, building legitimate business history. Then we started buying Frank's debts. It turned out my father had been living beyond his considerable means for years. The investment portfolio looked impressive on paper, but it was mostly stocks and companies that weren't doing well. He'd been borrowing against those stocks, always confident he could pay back when his next big deal came through. But his deals were failing. Without my mother's quiet management and her money shoring up his schemes, Frank's house of cards was wobbling. Partners were nervous. Investors were asking questions. That's when we started approaching them, offering to buy out their positions at a slight premium. They said yes every time. Nobody wanted to hold Frank's bad debt. And Frank never knew because purchases were made through my LLC. Within 4 months, I owned over 60% of Frank's business debts. I was effectively his primary creditor, and he had no idea. Meanwhile, Frank and Ashley lived like royalty. Ashley moved into the Maple Creek house and started renovating, documenting every change on Instagram. She hosted parties every weekend. Her follower count skyrocketed. She never missed a chance to mention her poor sister who'd been left nothing but a storage unit. Frank bought a 40-foot yacht named Second Wind. He joined the most exclusive country club and spent afternoons holding court, talking about his business acumen and disappointment in his younger daughter who worked with her hands like common labor. He came to the garage once, 3 months after the will reading. I was changing oil when I heard his voice. "Where's my little grease monkey daughter?" I slid out to find him near the bay door, too afraid of getting his shoes dirty to come closer. "There you are. Christ, look at you. Oil in your hair, dirt under your fingernails. Your sister is having dinner with the mayor tonight. And here you are, looking like you crawled out of a junkyard." The shop had gone quiet. Everyone watched. "What do you want, Frank?" I kept my voice level. He smiled nastily. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how my investment is paying off." "Oh wait, I didn't invest anything in you because you're not worth investing in. Tell me, are you still living in that apartment? Does the smell of motor oil ever wash out?" A year ago this would have destroyed me. But now, knowing what I knew, I felt only cold satisfaction. "You're right," I said quietly. "I do still live here, I do still smell like motor oil, and you know what? I'm okay with that. At least I earned everything I have, honestly." His face darkened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just that I sleep well at night. Do you?" He sputtered, but I'd already slid back under the car. Eventually, he left. Carlos came over afterward and patted my shoulder. "Good for you. That took guts." If he only knew. The 4th month was when things got interesting. One of Frank's business partners filed a lawsuit claiming fraud. Frank had convinced him to invest in a commercial real estate deal that went south. The lawsuit was all over the local news. Frank denied everything, went on television looking somber, talking about how sad it was when business relationships soured. But then, the partner's lawyer received an anonymous package with a USB drive. It contained a recording of Frank laughing about how he'd fooled his partner, proving he'd intended to defraud from the start. I'd sent that package, and I knew exactly what would happen next. The lawsuit expanded. Other former partners came forward. The investigation grew. Frank's reputation began to crumble. And because his reputation was crumbling, his current business deals fell apart. Investors backed out. Banks called in loans. Through my LLC, I started making moves. When Frank's credit lines got reduced, I bought them out. When partners wanted to exit, I purchased their stakes. Slowly, I was buying up pieces of my father's empire. Ashley noticed something was wrong before Frank did. She started posting less about lavish lifestyle and more about family values and perseverance. She did a series about standing by your father during difficult times. Her followers ate it up. But she didn't stop spending. The parties continued. The renovations kept going. She bought a white Range Rover for a professional photo shoot. She was burning through cash faster than she earned it, but didn't seem to care. Frank started to panic. He approached several banks about refinancing, wanting to pull equity from properties to cover legal fees and failing ventures. But the banks were nervous. That's when Frank made his first critical mistake. He approached Ashley about mortgaging the Maple Creek house. He only needed $500,000 to shore up his immediate problems. Ashley said no. The argument was loud enough that neighbors 3 houses down heard it. Ashley screamed that the house was hers, that Frank had no right to ask. Frank called her selfish. Ashley called him a failure. It ended with Frank leaving, tires squealing, and Ashley posting about how blood isn't always thicker than water. Their relationship, based on mutual benefit and shared contempt for me, was fracturing. And I hadn't even made my real move yet. That came in month 6. David Chen called early on a Tuesday. "Everything's in place. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about my mother's letter. About Frank's finger jabbing my chest. About Ashley's video. About a lifetime of being worthless. "Do it," I said. Using the LLC, we called in Frank's debts. All of them. At once. The letters went out by courier, delivered simultaneously. Within an hour, Frank knew his largest creditor was demanding immediate payment of over $800,000. He couldn't pay, not without liquidating assets at a loss. He called the LLC desperate to negotiate. David offered a payment plan with terms so onerous that accepting would put Frank in financial servitude for life. Frank tried to fight it. He hired good lawyers, but they found no legal flaw. The debts were legitimate. The LLC had purchased them properly. The demand was within contractual rights. Frank was trapped. Within 2 weeks, Frank's assets were frozen, his bank accounts locked, his credit cards stopped working, his yacht was seized, his country club membership suspended. The man who'd used money as a weapon suddenly had no ammunition, and Ashley, who'd been living off cash Frank supplied, was cut off too. Her phone got disconnected, then her utilities. First cable and internet, then electricity, then water. Each shutoff was another blow to her image. She tried keeping up appearances, posting old photos, but people noticed. I watched it unfold from my apartment. I went to work every day, changed oil, replaced brake pads, rotated tires. My coworkers asked if I'd heard about my father, and I said yes and left it at that. Carlos asked if I needed time off. I thanked him but said I was fine. The 8th month was when Ashley's Range Rover got repossessed in broad daylight with half the neighborhood watching. A tow truck hooked up the pristine SUV and drove away while Ashley screamed and filmed. She posted about predatory lending practices. The comments were merciless. Frank showed up at my apartment that night, pounding on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw him disheveled and sweating, his suit rumpled, face red with rage. I opened the door but left the chain on. "What do you want?" "Don't you frank me. I'm your father. You're going to help me. Talk to whoever owns that LLC and make them back off." "Why would I do that?" "Because we're family. Please, Evelyn. I know I haven't always been fair, but this is serious. I could lose everything. We need help." "You told me trash belongs in the trash," I said. "You told me I was an embarrassment. You tripped me at Mom's will reading. You came to my work to humiliate me. And now you want help?" His face cycled through emotions. Anger, confusion, desperation, maybe shame. I was upset that day. I wasn't thinking clearly. I say things I don't mean. "No, you say exactly what you mean. You just don't like consequences." I started to close the door, but he shoved his hand in. The chain held. "Evelyn, please, I'm begging you. Whatever you want, I'll make it right. Just help me." I looked at this man who'd never said a kind word to me, who'd spent decades making sure I knew how little I mattered, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just cold certainty that this was exactly what needed to happen. "I can't help you. I'm just a grease monkey who works at a garage, remember? What could I possibly do?" "You little bitch," he hissed, and there it was, the real Frank. He wasn't sorry, just angry I wouldn't save him. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. He pounded and shouted threats, but eventually Carlos called the police and Frank left. I sat on my couch afterward, hands steady, breathing calm. I'd just turned away my father in his greatest need, and I felt only relief. The next day, Ashley called for the first time in over a year. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Evelyn, it's Ashley. I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." Long pause, ragged breathing like she'd been crying. "Please, I know we haven't been close. I know I've been terrible, but I'm losing everything. The bank is foreclosing. They're saying Dad owes money to some company and they put a lien on the property. I can't afford property taxes. I can't afford food. My credit cards are maxed. I have nothing. What do you want from me?" "Money. Just enough to get through this. Just until I figure things out. I'll pay you back, I swear." I thought about her video of me at the will reading, about her laughing as Frank tripped me, about every snide comment. "Ashley, do you remember what you said to me that day? You asked if I needed canned goods, a sleeping bag for my 10 by 10 mansion. You filmed it and put it online for the world to see." "I was joking. I didn't mean anything." "Yes, you did. You meant every word. You enjoyed it. You got 10,000 new followers from that video. You built your brand on my humiliation." She was really crying now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was awful. But please, we're sisters. We're family." "Family? You know what Mom told me in her letter? She said you and Frank would drown in the ashes of your own making. She said I should let you strangle yourselves with your own pride. And she was right." "What are you talking about? What letter?" I hung up, blocked her number immediately. I didn't need to hear more. I'd gotten my answer the day she posted that video. The foreclosure sale was scheduled for the first week of month 9. The bank tried to negotiate with Ashley, but she had nothing to offer. Frank couldn't help because his assets were frozen. The house that had been in our family for 3 generations was going up for auction. The whole town knew. It was the biggest scandal Maple Creek had seen in years. Former friends posted their own videos, expressing shock and concern that barely concealed glee. The influencer who'd seemed to have everything had lost it all. I drove to the auction on a cold Tuesday morning. Leaves were falling, frost on the courthouse lawn. A crowd had gathered, maybe 50 people, some to bid but most to watch the spectacle. Ashley and Frank stood off to the side, separated from the crowd like they were contagious. Ashley looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 months. Hair in a messy ponytail, jeans and a sweatshirt instead of designer clothes. No makeup, no phone for once. She looked small and lost and utterly defeated. Frank just looked angry. He glared at everyone, jaw clenched, hands balled into fists. He'd lost weight, probably from stress, and his suit hung awkwardly. His Rolex looked fake now, like a costume prop. They saw me arrive. Recognition dawned on Ashley's face, followed by desperate hope. She started toward me, but Frank grabbed her arm, holding her back. The auction began. The auctioneer read out property details. 3.2 acres, 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. Opening bid set at $1.8 million to cover outstanding debts and liens. Silence. $1.8 million was a lot, even for Maple Creek. People hesitated. Then a man in a gray suit raised his hand. $1.8 million. Another hand. A woman in a camel coat. 1.9. $2 million, the gray suit countered. The bidding stalled. $2 million was fair value. The auctioneer called for more bids. No hands went up. He started his countdown. Going once, going twice. I stepped forward and raised my hand. 2.1 million. Every head turned. I felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers. That's the other daughter. The one who got the storage unit. What's she doing here? Ashley made a small sound between a gasp and a sob. Frank's face went purple. He knew. Somehow, he knew. The auctioneer looked surprised, but recovered. 2.1 million to the young lady. Do I hear 2.2? The gray suit shook his head and stepped back. The woman in the camel coat did the same. Nobody would outbid me at that price. The auctioneer counted down, and when his gavel fell, the house was mine. Stunned silence, then chaos. Ashley was screaming, held back by Frank, who was shouting about lawyers and fraud. People pulled out phones, recording everything. The auctioneer explained the payment process, while his assistants dealt with the commotion. I ignored it all. I signed paperwork, arranged the electronic transfer from my LLC, and accepted the temporary deed. The whole process took maybe 20 minutes. Finally, I turned to face them. I walked over slowly, deliberately. Ashley was crying hysterically, face blotchy and swollen. Frank looked like he might have a stroke. His hands shook. His breath came in gasps. How? Frank demanded. Where did you get that money? What did you do? I smiled. Not a nice smile. I found it in a storage unit. You know, the one full of trash? Turns out there was something valuable in there after all. You can't do this, Ashley sobbed. That's our house. Our family home. I already did. The auction is over. The house is mine. Legally, completely, irrevocably mine. Frank lunged at me. He actually tried to attack me right there, with 50 witnesses and multiple phones recording. Police officers grabbed him immediately, wrestling him back while he screamed obscenities. Ashley collapsed onto the grass, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. I watched these two people who'd made my life miserable, now completely broken and helpless. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. I turned and walked back to my truck. Behind me, Frank still shouted, voice hoarse and desperate. Ashley sobs. The crowd murmuring, already composing social media posts. But I didn't look back. The following week, I met with David Chen to finalize everything. The house was officially mine. The properties my mother left were generating steady income. The LLC was solid. I had more money than I'd ever imagined. So what now? David asked. What are you going to do with it all? I'd been thinking about that. I could keep the house, live the life Ashley had been living. I could expand business, build an empire. I could do anything. But I didn't want that life. I didn't want to become what Frank and Ashley had been. I want to give the house away, I told David. He raised his eyebrows. Give it away? To whom? There was a family I knew from the garage, the Johnsons. Marcus Johnson worked as a mechanic with me, and his wife Teresa was a nurse. They had 3 kids under 10, crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment. Marcus had told me his dream was to buy a house with a yard, but on their income, it was impossible. I'd checked on them. They were good people. They volunteered at their church. They helped neighbors. They were exactly the kind of family my mother would have wanted. I'm giving it to the Johnson family, free and clear. No mortgage, no strings attached. David looked at me for a long moment. Your mother would be proud. The day I handed over the keys was sunny and warm. I'd had utilities turned on and the house professionally cleaned. Ashley had trashed it on her way out, but it was fixable. I'd hired a landscaping company for the yard and a contractor to repair Ashley's half-finished renovations. The Johnsons arrived in their old minivan, kids bouncing with excitement. Marcus and Teresa looked at me like they expected me to take it all back. We stood on the front porch. I held out the keys, and Teresa started crying. I don't understand, Marcus said. Why are you doing this? We can't afford this house. You're not buying it or renting it, I'm giving it to you. It's yours. The deed is in your names. No mortgage, no payments. Just property taxes and maintenance, and I've set up a fund to help with that for the first few years. Teresa was crying too hard to speak. She pulled me into a hug, and I hugged her back, feeling something loosen in my chest. This was right. This was what my mother wanted. Not revenge, but justice. Not taking from Frank and Ashley just to hurt them, but redistributing what they'd hoarded, giving it to people who would appreciate it, who would fill this house with love. The kids ran inside, shouts echoing through empty rooms. Marcus shook my hand, then hugged me, trembling. This is too much. It's exactly enough. Take care of it. Make it a home. That's all I ask. I left them to their moment. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the 5 of them on the porch, kids exploring, Teresa and Marcus holding each other, looking at their new home like they couldn't believe it was real. Frank and Ashley found out. Ashley posted on Instagram a long, rambling rant about how I'd stolen her inheritance and given it to strangers, how this proved I was cruel and vindictive. The post got attention, but not the kind she wanted. Comments tore her apart. People called her entitled, spoiled, ungrateful. They pointed out I'd bought the house legally and could do whatever I wanted. They said if she'd managed her money better, she wouldn't have lost it. She deleted the post after a few hours, but screenshots lived forever. Her follower count plummeted. Brands cut ties. Her influencer career was effectively over. Frank hired a lawyer to challenge the foreclosure, claiming fraudulent debts. But David was ready. We presented documentation proving every debt was legitimate. Frank's lawyer withdrew after 2 weeks. Then Frank tried to challenge my mother's will, arguing she'd been mentally incompetent. That case died even faster. Multiple doctors testified Eleanor had been fully competent. When David suggested we might introduce evidence about Frank's business practices if the challenge continued, Frank's lawyer advised him to drop it immediately. After that, I didn't hear from either of them for months. I went back to my life. I kept working at the garage because I liked it. Carlos offered me a partnership, and I accepted. We expanded, hired 2 more mechanics. It was good, honest work. I did make some changes. I moved out of the apartment and rented a small house with a porch and yard for a garden. I bought a new truck because my old one finally gave up. I started taking classes at community college, thinking maybe I'd get a degree in business management. But mostly, I just lived. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner, watched television, read books, worked in my garden. I made friends with neighbors. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping with car maintenance. I dated a little, nothing serious. And slowly, gradually, I started to heal. I'd spent so long defining myself in relation to Frank and Ashley, seeing myself through their eyes as worthless, that I'd forgotten I could define myself differently. I could be Evelyn the mechanic, Evelyn the small business owner, Evelyn the volunteer, Evelyn the friend. I could be a person with value that had nothing to do with my family's approval. Therapy helped. I found a good counselor, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in family trauma. We worked through a lot. My complicated feelings about my mother, my anger at Frank, my hurt over Ashley, my guilt about enjoying watching them fall. Dr. Martinez helped me understand these feelings could coexist, that I could be hurt and angry and still move forward, that justice and revenge weren't the same thing. I also read my mother's letter again, trying to understand her choices. Why had she stayed with Frank so long? Why hadn't she protected me more while alive? Why had she waited until death? Dr. Martinez said my mother had probably been trapped in her own way, caught in patterns of abuse established long before I was born. She'd done what she could within her constraints. She'd built me an escape route, a weapon, a legacy of justice, even if she couldn't give me a childhood free from pain. It wasn't enough. Part of me would always wish my mother had been braver, had left Frank, had taken me somewhere safe. But it was something. And maybe, in her complicated way, it was love. Spring came, then summer. I celebrated my 29th birthday with Carlos and the guys from the garage. The Johnson kids stopped by sometimes, riding bikes past my cottage, always shouting hello. Teresa brought me vegetables from her garden, and we'd talk about ordinary things. It was nice, normal, peaceful. Then, on a hot July day, 14 months after the will reading, Ashley showed up at the garage. Carlos came to get me. "There's someone here to see you, your sister." My stomach clenched. I hadn't seen Ashley since the auction. She was waiting by the front desk, looking uncomfortable. She'd changed, lost weight, not in a healthy way. Her clothes were from a discount store, clean but worn, no jewelry, no designer bag, hair pulled back simply, minimal makeup. She looked like a completely different person. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Thanks for seeing me. I didn't say I would see you. I just came to find out what you want." She flinched. "Fair enough. Can we talk? Somewhere private?" I considered saying no, but curiosity won. I led her outside to the parking lot, away from the garage. "What do you want, Ashley?" She took a breath. "I came to apologize. I know it's way too late. I know you probably don't want to hear it. But I needed to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. For how I treated you. For that video. For all the years of making you feel less than. You deserved better." I studied her face, looking for manipulation. But all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. Why now? Because I lost everything. And when I had nothing left, when I was working retail and living in a studio and eating ramen, I finally understood what I'd done to you. Not just at the will reading, but your whole life. I made you feel like nothing. I joined Dad in treating you like you were disposable, and I did it because it made me feel powerful. Because it was easier to punch down than stand up to him. Tears ran down her face. "I've been in therapy, trying to figure out how I became such a terrible person. And my therapist asked when was the last time I did something genuinely kind for someone. No cameras, no followers, no benefit to myself. And I couldn't answer. I literally couldn't think of a single time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Part felt sad. Part just felt empty. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Ashley said. "I don't deserve that. I'm not asking for money or help. I just wanted you to know I understand now. I understand what I did, and if I could go back and change it, I would. But I can't. So, all I can do is tell you I'm sorry and try to be better going forward. We stood in the hot parking lot, sun beating down, traffic passing. This moment felt important, like a door that could either open or close permanently. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. I do. But Ashley, you hurt me for years, decades. One apology doesn't fix that. It doesn't undo all those times you laughed at me or excluded me or made me feel worthless. I know, she whispered. And what you did at the will reading, filming me like that, posting it online, that wasn't just mean. It was cruel. It was designed to humiliate me as publicly as possible. You wanted to destroy whatever dignity I had left. She nodded, unable to speak. So here's what I'll say. I accept your apology. I believe you're sorry. But I'm not ready to have you in my life. Maybe someday, but not now. I need more time. I need more distance. I need to keep building the life I've made for myself, and I can't do that while worrying about whether you're going to hurt me again. Okay, she said quietly. That's fair. That's more than fair. She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Thank you for listening. That's all I wanted. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. Ashley, wait. She turned back, hope flickering across her face. Are you okay? I mean, financially, do you have enough to live on? The hope died. I'm fine. I'm working. I'm paying my bills. It's not the life I had, but it's honest. And honestly, I think I'm happier now than I was when I had everything. Turns out being Instagram famous is pretty hollow. Okay, take care of yourself. You too, Evelyn. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you won. I'm glad Mom gave you the tools to fight back. We deserved what we got. She walked to her car, an old Honda that had seen better days, and drove away. I stood there for a while, processing. That had been the apology I'd imagined wanting so many times. But now that I had it, it felt anticlimactic. It didn't change the past. It didn't erase the hurt. It was just words, sincere words maybe, but still just words. I went back inside and finished my paperwork. Life went on. Frank never apologized. I heard about him occasionally. He'd declared bankruptcy. He'd moved to a small apartment 40 miles away. He'd tried to start a new business venture but couldn't get investors. His reputation was permanently damaged. The lawsuit had been settled with punishing terms. Frank would be paying it off for the rest of his life. Some people felt sorry for him. They'd see him occasionally, looking older and beaten down, and say what a shame it was. But most remembered what he'd been like at the height of his power, how he'd treated people, and felt he'd gotten what he deserved. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. He'd become irrelevant to me, a person who existed but had no impact on my life. And that, I realized, was the best kind of revenge. Not hurting him actively, but simply not caring anymore. 2 years after the will reading, I was accepted into a business program at a state university. I'd be able to keep working at the garage part-time while taking classes. Carlos was thrilled, said maybe when I graduated I could handle more of the business side so he could focus on the technical work he loved. It was a plan, a future, something to work toward. I also started dating someone seriously. His name was James, and he was a teacher at the local high school. He knew about my family situation because everyone in town knew, but he didn't treat me differently because of it. He liked me for who I was, not for who my family had been or what I'd done to them. We took things slow, building trust, learning each other. It felt healthy in a way I'd never experienced before. On the 2-year anniversary of my mother's death, I drove out to the cemetery. Her grave was in a peaceful spot under an old maple tree. Frank had paid for an expensive headstone, probably to maintain appearances, but he never visited. Neither did Ashley. I came once a month, bringing fresh flowers, pulling weeds, talking to her about my life. "Hey, Mom," I said, sitting on the grass beside her grave. "I brought the flowers you liked, the yellow roses." The wind rustled through the leaves above me. Birds sang in the distance. It was a beautiful autumn day, crisp and clear. "I wanted to tell you that I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm happy. I have good friends. I have meaningful work. I have a relationship that feels healthy and real. I'm building a life that's mine, not defined by Frank or Ashley or anyone else's expectations." I paused, running my fingers through the grass. "I understand why you did what you did. It wasn't perfect. I wish you'd been able to protect me more when you were alive, but you gave me the tools to protect myself after you were gone, and that's something. That's more than a lot of people get." I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "Frank's miserable. And Ashley's struggling. They lost everything. Just like you planned. But I didn't keep destroying them. I took what was mine. I used it to build something good, and then I walked away. I hope that's what you wanted. I hope you're proud." I left the cemetery feeling lighter somehow. I'd been carrying my mother's pain along with my own for so long, and it was time to put both down. She'd done what she could. I'd done what I needed to do. Now it was time to just live. The years passed. I graduated with my business degree. Carlos and I became full partners in the garage, and we opened a second location. The business grew. I bought a bigger house, got a dog, built a garden that would have made my mother jealous. James and I got engaged, then married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends. No family drama, no Instagram posts, just love and commitment and hope for the future. I saw Ashley occasionally around town. She'd nod or wave, and I'd nod back. We never stopped to talk. That door remained closed, maybe permanently, but at least it was closed without active hostility. She'd moved on with her life, and I'd moved on with mine, and that was okay. Frank I never saw. I heard he'd moved away entirely, gone to some small town in Pennsylvania where nobody knew his history. I hoped he'd found some kind of peace, but I didn't spend much time thinking about it. He'd become a ghost, a person who'd once been important but now was just a distant memory. 5 years after the will reading, Teresa Johnson called me. "Evelyn, you need to come see this." I drove over to the house, wondering what could be so urgent. When I arrived, Teresa led me to the backyard, where Marcus and the kids were standing around something covered with a tarp. "We were digging a new garden bed," Teresa explained, "and we found this buried about 3 feet down. We thought you should see it before we opened it." She pulled back the tarp to reveal another metal trunk, similar to the one I'd found in the storage unit but older, more weathered. It was locked, but Marcus had already broken the lock. Inside was more documentation, but this time it was different. These were love letters, dozens of them, written by my mother to someone named Catherine. They spanned decades, starting from before she'd married Frank. Reading them, I realized my mother had been in love with another woman, but in that time and social circle, she'd never been able to act on it. She'd married Frank for appearances, for social acceptability, and she'd been trapped ever since. There was also a letter addressed to me, dated just months before she died. "Dearest Evelyn," it read, "if you're reading this, you've found my secret. I'm sorry I never told you while I was alive. I was a coward in so many ways, but I want you to know that you were the only good thing that came from my marriage to Frank. You were the only pure, honest, beautiful part of my life. Every sacrifice I made so that you could be free in ways I never was. Live loudly, my darling. Love openly. Be exactly who you are without apology. That's all I ever wanted for you. All my love, always, Mom." I sat in that backyard, in the garden Teresa had planted, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from understanding. My mother had been trapped by circumstances, by society, by her own fears. But she'd used what power she had to free me. She'd spent decades planning, saving, documenting, all so that I could escape the same trap she'd been caught in. "Thank you," I whispered, looking up at the sky. "Thank you for giving me a chance you never had." I took the letters home and read them all, learning about the woman my mother had been beyond the role of Frank's wife. She'd been funny, intelligent, deeply romantic, and profoundly sad. But in her final act, she'd been brave. She'd reached beyond death to deliver justice and freedom to the daughter she loved. I never told Frank or Ashley about the second trunk. It wasn't their business. Those letters, that final message, they were mine, a last gift from a mother who'd loved me the only way she knew how. Now, 7 years after that awful day in the lawyer's office, I sit on my porch with James and our dog, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The business is thriving. My marriage is strong. I have friends, community, purpose. I have a life built on my own terms, free from the toxicity that once defined my world. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did to Frank and Ashley, if I feel guilty for the role I played in their downfall. The answer is complicated. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret taking what was rightfully mine. I don't regret giving the house to a family who would love it. But I also don't celebrate their suffering. I took justice, not revenge. I took back power, not to destroy them, but to free myself. The difference matters. Frank made his own choices. He chose to be abusive, controlling, fraudulent. He chose to treat me like garbage. The consequences of those choices were always going to catch up with him. I just happened to be the instrument. Ashley made her choices too. She chose cruelty over kindness, image over substance, greed over integrity. She's paying for those choices now, and maybe, based on that apology, she's learning from them. I hope she is. I don't wish her harm. I just don't wish her in my life. As for me, I've learned that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up for you. It's Carlos offering me partnership. It's the Johnsons treating me like an aunt to their children. It's James choosing me every day. It's Teresa bringing me vegetables and staying to chat. It's my coworkers having my back. It's Dr. Martinez helping me heal. It's all the people who saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. My mother's will wasn't about money or property or revenge. It was about giving me the tools to build a life worth living. And I did. I built it from the ground up, starting with a storage unit full of secrets and ending with a home full of love. The inheritance wasn't the bearer bonds or the real estate or even the evidence against Frank. The real inheritance was the knowledge that I deserved better, that I was worth fighting for. That trash doesn't belong in trash, because I was never trash to begin with. I was always valuable. I just needed the right tools to see it. The sun dips below the horizon, and James reaches over to take my hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asks. "Everything," I say. "And nothing. I'm just grateful." And I am. Grateful for the hard lessons. Grateful for the strength I found. Grateful for the life I built. Grateful for the mother who loved me enough to give me a fighting chance, even if she did it in the most unconventional way possible. The story wasn't about being discarded. It was about being prepared. About being armed for battle. About being loved in secret by a woman who couldn't love openly. And in the end, it was about winning. Not by destroying others, though that happened. But by building something beautiful from the ashes of something toxic. By taking pain and transforming it into purpose. By proving that no matter how low someone tries to push you down, you can rise. I rose. I'm still rising, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for the storage unit full of secrets that set me free.